Welcome to Author Talk. Today I'm speaking with Morgan Williams, retired frontline worker in England's Child Protection Services, who's recently written A Layperson's Guide to Child Safeguarding. I'm with Morgan Williams today, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And today we're here to talk about to talk about your book and your experiences around child safeguarding. Let me see, get this in the camera. Keeping children safe. And well, first of all, how are you doing? Are you staying safe during this period?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm self-isolating a bit. I'm retired now. I'm no longer working, unlike some of my younger colleagues, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, you're still getting your exercise and everything, though.
Yeah. All the good stuff.
Yeah, we were talking earlier, and you said you really miss going out, though.
Oh yeah, it's that normal thing, isn't it? You go out, or I go out at least, with lots, friends for coffees. We go shopping, we go National Trust, all those sort of everyday things. You need to leave in the car and you go somewhere. You go and see family, and of course, all those things have just stopped dead. It's a very strange time.
Well, I guess it leads us into the topic of your book. So your book is on child safeguarding, and I wanted to sort of discuss. So first of all, your background then. So you actually worked in child safeguarding.
Yep, I was a qualified social worker. Yeah.
Yeah, can you just say a little bit about your experience?
I was a registered social worker. I came to social work quite late compared to a lot of people. I had my children fairly young, and like a lot of parents, I started oh gosh, my mind's gone blank, doing voluntary work, such as things you do with schools and playgroups and all the rest of it. I left school just before my 16th birthday, but I always wanted to go to university. So in my early 30s, I became a mature student, and this was in the 1980s. That was quite unusual. When I qualified, I decided I really wasn't sort of commercially minded or business minded. And I started working as a project worker for Bernardo's, the disability project that no longer exists, which was great, a very happy time of work. But anything I wanted to do, anything creative, anything sort of moving up the ladder, I was always told, no, you can't do that. You're not a qualified social worker. So I did the obvious thing, got myself off to York University to qualify. And as one of my placements, my second placement, I did it with the old children and families team. And to be honest, I sort of found my niche, really. I found it quite hair-raising at times. Some of the things were different to me. Some of the things were very uncomfortable. You're working with very vulnerable families, and sometimes that's tough, especially as a student. That's very tough. But actually, I felt I could make a difference. Safeguarding children is basically where I spent my career.
I should just say for the audience we have that the reason you can't see your face is on purpose, and it's because of the sensitive nature of your child safeguarding, your previous job and experience. And how long were you then? You said you came to it late, but how long did you stay in that job then?
Well, in different authorities. So as a qualified worker, about 20 years. So quite a long, and different local authorities. The work's the same. The degree of the level of work is slightly different. Working in a city is slightly different from working for a county council, for instance. But problems that families bring are all the same.
So you've had like a big city and sort of small town experience then?
Yep, both, yes.
And is it essentially this? I mean, you said it's different, but are the sort of some of the family situations fairly similar, or is it completely different?
The team I worked in the city, it was a specialist team, and we worked at the very heavy end of child protection. So we're always taking children into care. That rarely happens. It is only the children in the worst situations, and I was in that team. Whereas the team that I worked with, my last team in fact, was much more general, all sorts of problems and issues, and I didn't take any children into care. So that is a difference. But I think that's probably more realistic about social work. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because there's lots of myths about social workers. You get a social worker involved, they take children away, you never see them again. Complete and utter fabrication. It doesn't work like that. But it's one of those very powerful myths that's a devil of a job to get over, really.
So would you say, is that the biggest myth then? Is it just that the social workers will come and sort of snatch your child away and you'll never see them
that's
again?
a favourite one. I think you would say that would be the favourite one.
Yeah.
They interfere. Well, yeah, that's our job to interfere, so that's okay. But yeah, that's probably the biggest one. This is the myth. People worry about getting, in terms of reporting abuse. They worry in case they get it wrong, or whether they get into trouble, or it might be a very aggressive family and they're a bit worried about, repercussions, which is understandable. And it's all those sort of things. I was just trying to unpick really in the book, very simply, and saying that this is what happens.
So do you think there's a lot of, I don't want to, it's sort of it's my neighbor's business or whatever, I shouldn't get involved type thing?
Yep. In a word.
Keep to myself kind of thing. Yeah.
There is, to be fair to people, a lot of neighbours and families do make referrals and sort of say, well, this is the problem, I'm not sure about it. And that's where you find out. To be honest, most of the vulnerable children are not known to children's social care. That's the other thing. There's lots of services now, like early help services, and children's centres have been cut quite dramatically. But if schools and all sorts of services go in, most times before they actually get to social workers, we're like the top end of the pyramid, if you like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a fair amount of issues going on, say, in the country that just still aren't reported at all, or the services aren't aware of at all?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's
a simple answer? Yeah, there are, because that's the thing. You can only do something about a child if you know about it, and if people don't pass the message on, and sadly sometimes they don't pass the message on, then how can you do anything about it?
Yeah.
And I get very cross, because when you have these terrible tragedies where children are killed, it's always, why didn't the social workers do more? Well, firstly, social workers sometimes aren't even involved. It's never even got up to that level. But the second thing I get very cross with is, yes, we all make mistakes. We're all human. I make mistakes the same as everybody else, or I'm sure I did in my work. But it's not the social workers or the police or the school or whoever else is involved. It's the parents, or it's the person who's done it is the one to blame. And we do have a very bad blame culture as well, which isn't helpful.
Yeah, we are the blame culture. As I've heard, the sort of Mediterranean cultures tend to be the shame cultures, don't they? Where you don't want to bring dishonor on your family. But I think we may even have I don't want to say perfect storm, but now we've sort of incorporated both cultures into our culture in different subsets, which probably isn't necessarily great for some kids. Have you seen anything like that? I mean, do you get sort of the different cultures and the problems that each one brings in this situation, or do you find it's more or less homogeneous, and they're all the same problems?
Culturally, there are some differences, but when you sort of burrow down into it, our shared humanity is the biggest thing. And problems are problems. Yes, there are some cultures where shame, sort of this notion of shame, can get in the way. Social working might be called racist. That's always a good one for trying to stop people in their tracks. You just go, no, I'm not racist. I'm trying to protect your child. But yeah, it's basically child abuse is child abuse, and it doesn't matter which ethnic origin, which culture you come from. And to say that certain things are more acceptable in some cultures is actually incredibly insulting to the vast majority of people who don't abuse their children.
Right.
So, and I feel quite strongly about that.
Yeah. No, I definitely didn't mean to suggest that that was, it's obviously a small percentage of all cultures that have such abuse.
Mm.
And I was just wondering if you see differences in different cultures, or this sort of the same problems, regardless of which culture it is. But,
It's basically the same problems. I mean, you can sort of list them really. They're quite straightforward. You get the people with sort of the parents, the adults I'm talking here, the drug and alcohol problems. I do actually mention gambling because I think that's a huge problem. All the addictions, you've got mental illness, which is a massive one. Domestic abuse, massive. Sometimes you just get people who are just horrible. I'm sure that's not quite the technical word for it, but it doesn't matter what support you put in, you're not going to change them.
Yeah, it just does feel like there's a small percentage of people that probably shouldn't have had children. They just don't really have any interest in bringing them up, for example.
I always think that if somebody's not interested in bringing up their child, give it to somebody who is interested.
Yeah, you'd think that would be reasonable.
Yeah, but rare.
So, I mean, you did mention some of the issues you come across in mental illness. I was actually, speaking of mental illness, I was wondering, it seems like mental illness is increasing in our society, or it's being diagnosed in a greater degree. Do you think then that there's a consequential increase in say, danger to children because of it?
No, I don't think it's any. I think people are more aware of mental illness.
Okay.
I don't think it's anything different. It's just we now talk about it, whereas certainly when I was growing up, you didn't talk about such things because it wasn't allowed. And as I say in the book, the vast majority of parents who've got mental illnesses, if they've got good support around them, like grandparents or friends, so that when they are unwell, the children are looked after by somebody who is not mentally ill, or it's managed, it's not a problem. And children are incredibly resilient. It's those people with mental illnesses who are very isolated, don't have good support networks, and they've got a child with them. That's the one people get worried about, and quite rightly too.
All right. So you think then that it's more or less stable, but we're more aware of it now. So in some ways, then probably it's better for the children, because since we are more aware, we can manage the child care much better.
That's a difficult one, really, though, isn't it? Because I know it's a long time since I was a child, but broadly speaking, children don't want their families to be different.
Right.
Especially once they start going to school and they start comparing notes and the rest of it. So to know that your family, your parents are different, it's actually quite difficult. Particularly if you've got a parent who says, well, we don't talk about it, we keep those secrets. That's hard on kids. I mean, there are services like young carers services and all sorts of services now. And I think adult services, mental health services, addiction services are much more aware of the fact that the patient or the client may have children, and looking at the impact and then passing the information on if that's where it needs to go.
Right. So, I mean, I think there's a relevant question from the audience, because you were mentioning dealing with a lot of, well, like mental illness, gambling problems, addiction problems. So we have someone who's wondering, how much did that affect you personally while you were doing that work, and sort of, do you think it changed you in any way?
I think the sad thing is that you can't say anything that would ever shock me. And that's not a good way to be. I still can feel very sad about individual children and things that are happening. But that is not good to be unshockable. I think at times I've got very angry. I've got very angry with parents, and I'd go back to the office and say, I'm going to kill somebody. No, you're not. No, you're not. Calm down. But I think it also gives me a great understanding. My life, like a lot of people's life, has not been straightforward. It's gone up and down like something not right. Sometimes when I look at some of the families I've worked, I look back at some of the families I've worked with, and I thought, gosh, I don't know how you're still holding things together where things have gone so badly wrong for them, and they're still fighting to, look after their children to the best of their ability. And I think the other thing, and I didn't put it in the book, but I've worked in some of the poorest areas with huge deprivation. And you come across the most kindest, most wonderful people, might be family friends, might be neighbours, who step in and help with children. They take children into their own homes, or sort of unofficial fostering and all sorts of things. And who are absolutely marvellous. I mean, then you have to sort of regulise the arrangements. And these are often people who have nothing themselves, and they're struggling themselves. And that's happened more than once. I mean, if it's just once, you say, oh gosh, that was exceptional. I've known it happen a number of times. I think it sort of puts your face back in human nature a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's rather nice.
It's kind of the way it should work in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, to see, yourself. I put a bit in the book about neglect. Neglect is always a difficult one. And you do sometimes get families that things like basic hygiene is not an issue, or is a big issue because they don't bother with it. And you get families that fight and argue and generally very aggressive to anybody outside that they perceive as authority, or they just don't like the look of it. And these are families that are really difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
And quite isolated as well. That's the other problem, because nobody wants to be near them.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Speaking of isolation, then that segues nicely into
I
something else I wanted to talk about, which was, I mean, obviously the quarantine right now. One of the issues that, well, once we sort of feel we've got are managing the COVID to the point where we can start returning, there's going to be a lot of issues we're going to discover, with regards to people who had, economic difficulties for the 6 to 8 or 12 weeks off, and also for families that were, let's say, sequestered together, that weren't used to being together all the time, and a lot of issues coming out from that. What do you think? Do you think we'll be seeing sort of a flood of sort of issues, child safeguarding issues coming to light, or do you think, are you more optimistic than maybe I'm suggesting?
I'm never optimistic about these things. I think there will be an increase in referrals. The problem we have at the moment is all services in effect have closed down. So all the services that you would normally have supporting families, like that's the basics that we take for granted: schools, nurseries, preschools, youth groups, if there's any remaining. These are incredibly protective factors in a child's life. Some children love going to school, not because they're particularly academic, but it's a place of safety. And all of a sudden, we've taken that all away, and we've stuck parents, even the sort of the non-abusive families that wouldn't come our way. Well, I can think of, my own family. The sheer stress of all being squashed up together for however many weeks it's been. We haven't killed each other yet, so which is quite good. But it's come close once or twice.
Yeah, we find the moods come and go. Some days are really good, some days less so.
Exactly. Yeah. But and you take all that. But I think for children, especially vulnerable children, you've taken away all their safety net. And I know social workers have not been furloughed; they're not taking time off, and they are doing their jobs, but they're having to do a lot more remotely, a lot more using technology, and they will go in and take a child into care if that's required. But if you go and see a family, and a family that's struggling, you use all your senses when you go in to see that family, especially the first time you meet them.
Right.
And not it's only what you see and hear, it's what you smell.
Yeah.
Smell is very useful.
Yeah.
Touch, especially babies. I used to love with all the babies. I always used to cuddle all the babies. But that was twofold. One, I like babies. So that was a sort of perk of the job, if you like. But the second thing is, if you're concerned about childcare and you say, oh, let me have a look at little so-and-so, let me give him a cuddle because he's so cute. Generally, babies are very cute, so that's easy. Is that baby clean and dry? You know,
Right.
I don't think a male social worker could get away with that. But being of a certain age, I could go in and do that, and those sort of jobs. But I think going back to the COVID thing, the thing that really strikes me is we have left children isolated. They become invisible, and that really, really worries me. Yeah.
Invisible, how do you mean? Just because we're not thinking about them because they're at home?
Yeah, exactly. It's, if a child's at school every day, teachers, teaching assistants, people pick up when there's something not right.
Right.
If they miss, they pick it up. Younger children, nursery, preschools, infant schools, parents go into school, especially primary school, they're much more involved in their child's education. So the school gets to know the family. That's not happening at the moment. Something goes wrong, child goes into school, tells teacher, teaching assistant, dinner ladies are always a good source of information. Then somebody can do something. That's not happening at the moment, and that does worry me.
Right. Yeah. So when things start easing back,
Yeah.
It could be up to everyone to sort of pay attention and see if we can note any families that may have been, or children that may have been having trouble during these periods. What kind of things do you think we might look for? Sort of, factors that might suggest there could have been a possible problem.
I think it's child's behaviour. I mean, you think, we've talked a lot about very poor families, families lacking in money, but certainly I've worked with families who have had far more money than I could ever dream of having. It's not just confined to the poorest families, and then they're often more difficult ones because they'll hide behind solicitors. That's a favourite. I'll get my solicitor on you. Well, that's fine. I'm quite happy chatting to solicitors. They will try to threaten you. Don't you know who I am, sort of thing, and all that. So a lot of child abuse never ever comes out, and I don't think it will be much different after all this is over.
Right.
What I do think is that schools and places, even before as the lockdown was beginning, they were suddenly referring children that they'd been a bit bothered about but weren't quite sure. Apparently there was quite a rise in referrals to children's social care. And I suspect as they come back, again, it's things that bother people, but they've not got the confidence to say, I think there's something wrong. Again, it might be a spike because they're thinking, we haven't seen them for 3 months or however long. We need to do something. But,
right. I guess it's difficult as well, isn't it, on that sort of one time? I mean, it's basically trends, isn't it? You have to observe the child over a period of time to kind of get the idea. So teachers are sort of ideally positioned for that, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, that's what happens day to day. It's generally, I mean, sometimes people themselves will ring up and refer because they're having such a terrible time, they don't know where to go and whatever. A lot come through. We have what is called early help, which is meant to be not got the same stigma as going through children's social care. But of course, you get in early intervention workers who are not working because all the early intervention, the early help centres are closed at the moment or working virtually. And quite often they'll say, well, we've tried everything with this family. This hasn't worked. Over to you, because you've got the legal powers to do things, which they haven't. They work on a consent. The parents have to consent to work.
So after 20 years then, so what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I got very cross, actually. As I say, I do get cross about misreporting in the media, of which there is a great deal.
Right.
the role of social workers, what they do. But my last job was with a local team, just a local team, from the social workers there, which was great. It was a really good team to work for. But what appalled me was not my colleagues in social work, but other agencies who didn't know what they were supposed to do. The great thing about safeguarding is everybody's business. But I was coming across professionals from all professions who, well, I was a bit concerned, but I didn't know what to do. Well, you have structures, you have phones, ring us up. And they really didn't. And it was the basic stuff. It wasn't the technical stuff, because like everything, what I've written about is a really straightforward stuff. You've got a concern, you're worried about it, you ring up social care and get some advice whether to make a referral or not. That's basically what the book tells you about it. But these were professional people who did have concerns, and one or two quite serious concerns, and hadn't done anything about it. So I was very cross and ranting at the television, and my husband said, well, why don't you write something rather than sit there yelling at the television? So that's what I did.
So which audience are you aiming at for this book then, ideally? I mean, of course you'd like the information to get as wide as possible, I assume, but did you write this then, as you were saying, for a very specific target audience?
No, it's just an incredibly broad target audience. The idea is anybody who, I mean, you can be a family. It doesn't matter. You can be a concerned grandparent, but it can be absolutely anybody. It's not aimed at people who've got professional knowledge of safeguarding. I wouldn't recommend it to a social worker because they'd find it far too basic and right at the beginning. It's sort of an ABC of safeguarding, if you like. But anybody who's going to work with children, it tells you the basics,
right.
And that's very, very much where it's aimed at.
So if you had, say, 100 free copies to give out, where would you distribute them then that you would think they'd be most effective?
I would distribute them to schools, nurseries, playgroups, doctor's surgeries. Who else would I need to give them to? Just anybody and everybody, really. It's as simple as that. It's anybody who wants to know what we're talking about. When we talk about safeguarding, it's a term people throw around all over the place. This is what it is, and this is what it means. But also defining what we're talking about, because we also talk a lot about abuse and neglect, and actually saying what it is in some parts in very basic language. This is what we're talking. We use a lot of euphemisms like sexual abuse. Well, actually, what we're talking about is the rape of a child. If we look at it like that, it's like, whoa, that's what we're talking about.
So one question from the audience then is, so if you were to summarize your book sort of very concisely, what were the messages you want to pass to the audience, to the readers, I guess, and so what are the key messages you'd like them to learn?
I'd like them to learn, if they are worried about a child or a young person, and they know that something's not going right, it might be a young person telling them or whatever it is, don't just ignore that information, pass it on to somebody who can deal with it, in children's social care. And if you're not sure whether it needs to go to children's social care, ring them up and ask and have a chat about it. It's as simple as that. And
you have a lot of contact information in the back of the book, I remember.
Yes, I do, yeah. Just straightforward. I mean, you can ring up the NSPCC if you don't want to talk to your local authority, perhaps if you are a neighbour rather than a professional, and they will take the details, and then if they're concerned, they will pass it to the local authority instead. So, and they will give advice. So there are different channels. NSPCC are working, as are all the other organisations at the moment.
Right. So we're pretty much near the end. So with your book, so it's available on Amazon in ebook and print formats?
Yep, that's right.
And do you remember the price for it?
I looked it up. There you go, because otherwise I wouldn't. It's $4.99 for the hardback and $3.99 for the Kindle.
Excellent. So is there anything else you'd like to add then before we sign off?
The only other thing I would say, people get very frightened of safeguarding, what it is and how it is, and it shouldn't be scary. It's not meant to be scary. And the final thing I would like to say, as a retired social worker, I have done some things that have very much upset families, undoubtedly. But just occasionally, families, the idea of working with families is to turn things around so it's better for them and better for their children. And sometimes that does work. And when that works, you think, all the abuse that I get on a daily basis and all those rude names I get called, yeah, sometimes you think, yeah, I've done a good job.
Yes, I'm sure. Well,
I
thanks
have
very
one or
much
two
for.
successes.
So, yeah.
Not many, but some.
Yes, I'm sure those are the shining, the moments that keep you going, aren't they?
Any social worker would tell you the same. It's the ones where families go, yeah, I can see what you're going. I can see what you're saying. Let's try.
Well, thanks very much for joining me tonight or today, Morgan. And I hope the rest of the quarantine goes okay and you'll get back out to your regular routine soon. And hopefully there's not too many, we don't see a too much problem with child safeguarding when this is all over. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
I suspect it will go on as it always have. Too much demand for services and not enough services, sadly. Yes. But that is always the way.
Okay, well, thanks again, and
okay.
Have a good evening.
Thanks very much. Good night.